I'm Charles R. Bowen, I have lived in this community most of my life. We moved into Harold Ickey's projects in 1954 with my family, a family of four, three boys and a girl. And we moved in here, like I said, in 1954. I was active in politics for most of my life. I was administrative assistant to Congressman William L. Dawson, who was the powerhouse of black politics in the city of Chicago. And at 18, 19 years old, I was his administrative assistant. So from that, I was in charge of the Gambling and Vice Unit in the State's Attorney's Office for 5 years. I was a Cook County Commissioner. I was clerk of the county board. I was a senior executive assistant to Mayor Daley for 22 years. And I organized ministers in the city of Chicago. We had the largest ministerial organization of ministers anywhere in the country in Chicago. Over 5,000 preachers. We've had over 100 preachers in this area here at a time. So that's kind of been my involvement. I probably missed some things. Well, I had a good taste of it because my stepfather was a waiter on the railroad, on the Southern Railroad out of Atlanta, Georgia. We lived in Atlanta. I was in Atlanta at that time. I was actually born in Atlanta, Georgia. Mother brought me here when I was like 4 or 5 years old. Stayed in grammar school till I was in like the 2nd grade. Had to go back to Atlanta. And I finally wound up in the 7th grade coming back to Chicago, and of course I've been here ever since. That area, I guess I was, what, maybe 10, 11, somewhere in that neighborhood. But we traveled because as a waiter on the railroad, he got passes and my mother and I would travel from Atlanta to Chicago, and we'd have to take different routes sometimes just based on the fact that we were traveling on a pass. They would schedule us to go from Atlanta to Chicago, but we'd have to go through New York or have to go through Cincinnati or Washington, D.C. And because it was Jim Crow at the time, we had to set in different cars. You know, our cars were always up next to the engine, and you got all the soot and the dust and so forth, you know, and it was during World War II, so you were traveling with a lot of Army personnel or Navy, armed forces people would be traveling, you know, and that. So we saw life like that. It was some kind of, it was, in a way, it was difficult traveling on a pass. I remember one time that in Toledo, Ohio, we had to take a train. We were on our way back to it. We had been in Chicago for the summer, and we were on our way back to Atlanta from here. And we had to take the Chesapeake and Ohio train through Toledo, Ohio. Had to get off the train in Toledo, Ohio to wait for a Baltimore and Ohio train to take us into Washington. We got into Toledo, it was like about 4 o'clock in the morning. And we had to get off the train to wait for the next train, which didn't come until like 6 o'clock in the evening. We didn't have any money. And my mother and I are standing there watching this train disappear in the night. and nobody on the train, I mean, nobody on the tracks but us. We're on the platform for the train, you know. So then, of course, but that evening, when the train did come, we were like royalty because everybody knew my stepfather, all the waiters and so forth. So we ate in the dining car. It was first class. So that was kind of the way we traveled, you know. But most people in those days traveled by car. And I was telling my friend that Chicago, of course, was the end of the line. So I don't remember any hotels, any black hotels in Chicago that were for transit, you know, because I don't think there was a real reason, because everybody who was coming, they were coming to Chicago to stay. This was their haven, you know. We'd go to, well, during the summer, for an example, blacks, Idlewild, Michigan, places like that were always, they were black institutions, more or less, you know, and those who could afford it would always travel there. The only reference I have to the Green Book was I played baseball, and we played what we call, well, it was sandlot baseball, you know. We did, I'm trying to think of what, barnstorming is what we called it. And we would get in a bus or whatever, and we would travel to various cities like in Iowa, Minnesota, and we'd go into a city, maybe they were having a baseball game that night. One or two of us might hire out to play on a team just for the night. And we'd get incentives, you know. The guy would put me in, and let's say, because I could run. And so they put me in, and I could steal bases. So the guy would say, if you steal second, I'll give you $20, you know, pay you $25 to play, but I'll give you 20 more onto it if you steal second, if you own and you steal second base. I mean, that was the guys, that was how we made money during the summer. And we would travel, and I remember in Nashville, there was a Browns hotel, and this guy was way ahead of his time, a black operation, and he was ahead of his time because he had a restaurant in one of the Browns that sits on a corner. It sits on the corner of Tennessee State University, and this place sits right on the corner across the street from the university, and they had like a 2-story hotel. Well, the team that we were with at that particular, that's where we stayed, and it was Browns, and everybody talked about the fact that it was a black-owned operation and so forth. So I would imagine that they're in the Green Book. Well, we had restaurants in Chicago that because I lived here. I mean, I didn't need hotel facilities, but I lived here. So the restaurants in that time, Gladys's one that sticks out, and that anybody who was in Chicago at that time would have known about Gladys's. Army and Lou's was a Isola's. These were places that everybody knew, and some served dinner, some served, they basically served all day long. Those were, the church, I was telling my friend that the church was a big supporter of the business. Like Gladys was a member at First Church of Deliverance, Reverend Clarence H. Cobb's at 40, he's at 42nd and Wabash. And his church sponsored Gladys. I mean, she came out of the church, the Reverend made sure that she had the revenue to start a business and keep it up. And so that was the way the operations ran, basically. But food was great. I mean, I think people have tried to duplicate Gladys's food for years, and nobody has been successful at creating what Gladys had. Well, I was a policeman, and I was in charge of the gambling and vice unit in the state's attorney's office, so we made raids, gambling raids, and those prostitution raids, stuff like that. And usually on Saturday night, I'd take the whole crew and go to the Sutherland, and you'd see Arthur Prysock, Nancy Wilson, Dinah Washington, all in person there. And it was just they would come and sit with us and talk to us. They want to know where we were, who did we lock up, what our life was about, and so forth, you know. And we would talk to them. I mean, it was a great atmosphere. It was just you'd go in and have some drinks, and Miles Davis would be playing on his trumpet, you know. I mean, it wasn't like a big deal. This was like every week that this would happen, and we wouldn't know who was going to be there. And nobody kept up with like a schedule or anything like that. It was just, we just walked in, and here we are, you know. The Sutherland was a major place for entertainment. A lot of places didn't have, you know, entertainment. I was trying to think. Jerry Oliver owned, and I'm trying to think of the name of her place, and I don't know how in the world I can't remember. Now I didn't. It was really a little bit before my time, and I didn't go to but I knew about it. My mother and Jerry Oliver were very good friends. They were close friends, and Jerry owned the Palm Tavern. There it is. Owned the Palm Tavern for years, and the Brass Rail was down the street on 47th Street, just west of the Palm Tavern. So these were places that Friday, Saturday night, these places were packed with people. You know, everybody was very clean, very sharp. Guy could be a laborer at the stockyards, but when he came out on Fridays, Saturday nights, he was clean. So, and of course, our community at that time was kind of, it wasn't nearly as expansive as it is today. Our community started at about here, 31st Street, would have probably been our northern boundary, and they went, and we're talking about now like the late 60s, we might have gone to 95th Street, south, and east, Cottage Grove would probably have been the boundaries all to Wentworth over. That was basically the area that we were in, and our businesses, our schools, and everything was connected in those areas.